So what I've got here is a little Windows network, maybe like one you might have at home. So I've got a couple of Windows machines here and maybe a printer, whatever it might be. Now, if you use Windows, and I'm gambling you do, one of the things you've noticed is that this computer right here seems to just magically know about the names of all the computers that are on the network. And what I want to do is take a moment and talk about why this happens. Now, this is one of these rare situations where it's really kind of important to me that you've watched other videos. So I need you to make sure you've watched any and all DNS videos for this course before you get into this one. Because what's happening in these Windows networks is that they're not using DNS. They're using something completely different. Because in this particular situation, there is no DNS server. Oh, you may have your web set up for a DNS server here, so if you type in Google, you can get to Google. But that DNS server is not, as we say, authoritative to know about these little computers here. So where do all these names come from? Well, in order to understand that, what we need to first do is understand the difference between a workgroup versus a domain. Now, I've got two computers here in front of me, and I've set them up as a workgroup. Now, when you initially install Windows, you do two things. Number one, you give your computer a name, and then number two, you give it the type of network it's in, either a workgroup or a domain. Now, a workgroup, which is my setup here, is the most simple form of networking you can do within Windows. In essence, these computers are all what we call peers. They all connect, they're all connected to the same switch, and as they boot up in the morning, they start to broadcast going, "This is my name," and then all the other computers write that down so that if they need to talk to these computers, they can see each other instantly in your networking or My Network Places, whatever your version of Windows decides to call it. So let's take a look on this system right here and make sure you understand how the workgroup is configured. So to get to workgroup, we go to System. And if you look right here, you can see there's my computer name right here, and then here's the word workgroup. Now we can hit change settings there, but that's absolutely no fun at all. So let's go to Advanced System Settings, and let's go to Computer Name right here. So you can see right now my computer is set up with the name Mike's PC, and he's in the workgroup called Workgroup. This is a very common name, and most people, when they first set up a network, particularly at home, it just defaults to this. Now, Workgroup doesn't do a whole lot for us other than one thing. So let me show you what happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my File Explorer, or Windows Explorer, and right here, when I click on Network, you're going to see it only sees two computers. These two computers are configured to be on a workgroup called Workgroup. So the interesting part about this is that when you're in a workgroup, these computers simply start broadcasting out, reporting each other's names, and everybody on the network eventually finds each other. Now that is one interesting part about workgroups, is that when you first set up a workgroup, if you have more than, say, 2 or 3 computers on it, it can take a moment before that completely populates with all the names of the different devices. Now a domain is a different animal. In a domain, what you're doing is you're installing another computer. Now this computer here is not like your regular computer. He's running a very special type of software called Windows Server. What? You've never seen a server? Well, come on, let me show you one. This is my Windows Server right here. This system is configured to act as a domain controller. Now the problem here is I don't really have a keyboard or a monitor or anything to talk to it right here. So let's head back to the office and we'll use Remote Desktop to talk to this guy. Now if you really want to talk to that server, I have to fire up Remote Desktop Protocol here. So if you're not familiar with Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, I've got an entire video on it. Be sure to check that out. So anyway, here I am in Remote Desktop, and I've got a remote connection to my server. And if you take a look right here, it says Windows Server Standard. Now this is an older version of Windows Server, but it's a good one and I like it. Windows Server is not to be confused with regular versions of Windows, the workstation versions of Windows. So if you have Windows Pro or Windows Home, this is a different animal altogether. This has a number of extra features that allow it to do some pretty cool stuff. For example, this has a built-in DHCP server. This also has a built-in DNS server. These are features that you're not going to see in a regular version of Windows. So let's take a look at these. One of the big differences you're going to see on a Windows server is something called Server Manager. It's kind of like your one-stop shop for all the main features that are server-esque on a Windows server system. And if you take a look here, you'll see I have a DNS server, I have a DHCP server, And then I have Active Directory Domain Services. What I'm doing is I'm establishing this guy as the big kahuna of this network. He is going to be creating a domain. Now if you take a look right here, you'll see the name of my domain is Total Home. Now if you're familiar with DNS, you'd be saying, Mike, that doesn't sound like .com or .org or anything like that. And that's because this domain is it's a little in-house network just for my little network. That's all I need, so I don't have to stick to all the fully qualified domain name rules that we see with full-blown DNS. So once I've got this DNS server up and cooking, the next job I'm going to have to do is get my individual systems to join that domain. Let me show you how that works. So here, now I'm doing this on Windows 10, but you can do this on any version of Windows. So you'll notice right here that the computer name is Studio, but look at its full name, studio.totalhome. And again, we click on Advanced Systems. And if you take a look right here, you'll see that the name of my computer is studio.totalhome and my domain is TotalHome. If I want to, I can join a domain using this methodology. Now the important thing to keep in mind here is that if you join a domain, you have to have an account on the domain. And this is a big difference between workgroups versus domains. In a domain, you have what are known as domain accounts. So when you log into a domain, your network administrator has had to have already created a name, not your local name that you log in with a workgroup, but a domain name that allows you to log on to the entire domain. Domains give us a lot of big benefits. For example, if all of my computers are on a domain, I can log into any computer within that domain, and if I've got it set up right, my entire desktop, all my personal stuff will automatically log in with me. I don't have to worry about memorizing a whole bunch of different usernames and passwords, which is very convenient. Domains are really very cool. Now, what's going to take place in a domain is that, let's say this was a work group and I add a domain controller. The moment I add a domain controller and I have these guys join the domain, just like I was doing there, these computers will no longer broadcast. The moment they see they're in a domain, they'll simply go, excuse me, Mr. Domain Controller, may I please have myself logged into the domain, and the DHCP works and everything. It's pretty magical. Now, the one challenge people run into is that if the domain controller is also a DNS server, and they always are, then why am I putting DNS information on these individual systems? Well, on my system in particular, you'll notice that it was just authoritative for Total Home. In other words, if you're not a member of Total Home, he's not going to try to make any authentication to that. So what he's going to do instead is he's going to send you off to that other DNS server that you have listed. And again, if you're not comfortable with that, double check my DNS video because we go through this in great detail. Windows naming is pretty amazing the way it works. It's a little bit old school using some of these broadcast features, but it still works pretty well and certainly upgrades nicely using domain controllers. In fact, Windows naming is so popular that every other operating system, well, certainly anything that Apple or Linux makes, has complete compatibility with this. Under the generic name of Samba, all of these other operating systems have features which allow them to act exactly like Windows systems. So your Mac can join a domain, or your Linux box can join a work group. Everything works equally well no matter what OS you've got.